Hi everyone, I'm Ariel Clary, and I'm here to present to you both my research on the Gothic genre, as well as my novella written inspired by this research. Now, when I first started this project, I had no idea that it was going to be a creative piece. I thought that I was going to be writing an academic research paper on Gothic literature. So I grabbed the handbook to Gothic literature. Now, this is sort of a Gothic nerd's pocket dictionary. It alphabetizes all of the key terms and authors related to the genre. Now, of course, I found myself drawn to all of my favorite authors like Edgar Allan Poe and Bram Stoker. But as far as terms, I was really interested in terms like madness, love mad, mad woman. And I was interested in these because they kept on bringing up feminist discussions. And I started to realize that there was a lot of sexist portrayals of women within Gothic literature, especially written by men, and especially in the 19th century. Elaine Showalter, in her Female Malady, talks about female madness. She's a feminist literary critic. Before I go on, I want to kind of talk about what female madness means in this feminist discussion. Female madness could be mental illnesses like schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, but it can honestly just be any day-to-day female struggles like PMS or postpartum. And honestly, it can be any high emotional state. Anger, sadness. And you might be thinking, aren't these normal experiences for every human to go through? Yes, they are. But in this time period and in this English culture, if a woman was having these experiences, it was considered mad. Now, Elaine Showalter talks about how there are two sides to this coin of female madness within Gothic literature. On the one hand, it was seen as very unladylike, manipulative. If a woman was in emotional distress, crying and yelling, it was seen as guilt-tripping, abusive. But on the other hand, it was also portrayed as being beautiful, sometimes even erotic, especially written by men. Women in these novels would have love affairs with their doctors or their psychiatrists, and the men thought it was so beautiful that they were weak and frail. Showalter says this comes from the idea of the knight in shining armor, the man swooping in and saving the woman from her own madness. Karen Stein talks about Gothic monsters. Gothic literature has to have the monster, vampires, werewolves, you name it. Stein makes an important point that there was a difference between male monsters and female monsters in these novels. The male monsters were always portrayed as very intelligent, capable of rational thought. They were businessmen or brilliant scientists. Think of Dracula or Jekyll and Hyde. Whereas the female monsters were always portrayed as totally irrational, completely mad. The classic example of this would be Bertha from Jane Eyre. For much of the novel, Jane thinks Bertha is this mysterious monster in the attic, but we find out that it's actually Rochester's wife that he has locked up there. And so because this was written by a woman, because it was written by Bronte, we become much more suspicious and scared of Rochester than Bertha. Rochester really becomes the monster. While Bertha is portrayed as very feral and rabid, and Rochester uses this as his excuse to lock her up, we start to suspect that she has gone insane because he has neglected her in this way. So at this point in my research, I think that I had decided that if I was going to study one Gothic author for an entire year, it would most likely be a female Gothic author, not a male Gothic author. And so for me, it really came down between Charlotte Bronte and Emily Bronte. And I went with Emily because while there is a ton of analysis on both, I felt like there was slightly less on Emily. And so while I was rereading Wuthering Heights, I grabbed the most obvious book for this research, Mad Woman in the Attic by Gilbert and Gubar. Gilbert and Gubar argue that there is a feminist subculture created by the Brontes within the Gothic genre. They had progressive themes in their novels, but not so progressive that they couldn't get them published. They did have to blend progressive characters with some of the more problematic characters. And they had to publish under fake male names at first as well. But still, their novels did receive a ton of hate, and I will be showing some reviews from the 1800s on these novels on the screen in a moment. Now, one of the issues that these novels had was that they had very grotesque portrayals of domestic abuse, and so does my novella, The White Trunk. But the Brontes felt that this was necessary because they wanted to force society to look at something that it did not want to look at, to force it to look at something that they had previously justified or normalized. The other issue these novels had was that they had very unique female characters. Jane Eyre and Catherine Earnshaw are symbols of female rage, pride, rebellion, and independence. Now, if it's okay with you, I am going to hide my camera for the next couple of slides just because there's a ton of stuff going on. I wish I had time to talk about Jane and Catherine, but I think we're going to have to just focus on Catherine for today. Emily had to put Catherine into the expected whirlwind of emotional distress and romance for a woman in a Gothic novel. But the unique thing about Catherine is that she was very resilient, and she fought back against men like her father or Heathcliff or Edgar. Instead of being admonished and defeated into submission, she continued to fight back the only way that she could, which was starving herself to death. Anorexia. Now, of course, this was taken very negatively, but feminist critics today look back on Catherine's situation and they know that her anorexia was not a way to control and abuse the men around her. It was a way for her to take back the control men took away from her. Like she said many times in the novel, I am Heathcliff. I am Heathcliff. He is me. Something that Heathcliff and Edgar did to her was gaslighting. This happened a lot in Gothic novels, where the men would convince the women that they were so mad, so incapable of rational thought, that their own thoughts and feelings, desires, and opinions could not be trusted, and that they had to let their husbands' or their lovers' thoughts and decisions be their own. Heathcliff got angry at Catherine for starving herself to death and considered it selfish, but we can sympathize with her, knowing that she thought it was her only way out. So it was around this time that I decided to maybe do a creative piece. And I had put this off for so long partially because I was nervous to share my own work, but also because ironically and hilariously, I thought that this would be sort of cheating or an easy way out. And I think that's because I am very passionate about fiction. I am a creative writing major, not a literature major. And I thought it would just be so fun to write my own Gothic story. And it was, and I don't regret it at all, but it was definitely not the easy way out. It was not a short story. It turned into a 130-page novella with 4 different drafts, so many revisions. But it was definitely one of the most intense, exciting, wonderful experiences I have had in my time at St. Edward's. So now that I had decided to do a creative piece, I had to start thinking about why, as a modern writer, am I so drawn to these relationship dynamics, the sexism? Where am I seeing this in modern society? How does it translate into the 2000s? Well, in Wuthering Heights, this abuse was justified or normalized by classism. In the 19th century, women made less money, they had less education and job opportunities, so they were seen as less than men. In my novella, The White Trunk, the sexism and abuse is justified by the perversion and twisting of religion in a 2010s American Christian homeschool community. So Kathy from Wuthering Heights is seen as mad or selfish for her emotional distress, but my Kathy in my novel is punished for her emotional distress because the community that she is in does not believe in mental illness. And if they do believe in mental illness, they believe that it comes from something they call heart problems. If something is wrong with her emotionally or mentally, it's because something is wrong with her morally. So instead of getting the help that she needs, like therapy and medications, she's instead punished and disciplined for her mental illness. Kathy in Wuthering Heights is very isolated. Her world is Heathcliff, the Earnshaws, the Lintons. And in the same way, my Kathy is also very isolated. You think it might not be possible for a teenage girl to be isolated in the way girls were in the 1800s, but I think it definitely is. My Kathy was isolated because she was homeschooled, because she would often have her phone taken away, which was her only access to the outside world. Her entire world became her family and her house. There was an eerie sense of loneliness you find in Gothic literature. Kathy from Wuthering Heights starts to escape her situation and be with a more free-spirited Heathcliff, and so does mine, but like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, he just kind of ends up being worse than Mr. Earnshaw anyway. Now, Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights and in my novella are the same, in that they're not physically violent men like Mr. Earnshaw, but they are very mentally abusive, and they have the same snake-like characteristics. I would say Mr. Earnshaw in Wuthering Heights is abusive out of ignorance or tradition, and I think that my Mr. Earnshaw is abusive out of a misguided love, having bad temper and false perceptions of the Bible. Kathy in Wuthering Heights escapes all of this through her anorexia and essential suicide. And in the same way, my Kathy escapes through self-harm, and she does end up taking her life. Now, while suicide was not the only answer for either Bronte's Kathy or my Kathy, I think that Bronte and I both feel the need to share this blunt reality that some women do feel like this is their only way out. And while I'm sure Bronte was very afraid to speak this truth, I am also very afraid to speak this truth, but nevertheless, here I am. Now, on a much lighter note, I do want to talk a bit about craft. I wanted to adopt some of the 19th century Gothic craft elements in my own novel. And one of those is using a tertiary character to narrate the story. Edgar Allan Poe does this all the time. For example, Nellie in Wuthering Heights tells most of the story. And so I have a Nellie character in my novella. It's actually Kathy's best friend. She finds a white trunk in Kathy's room. She goes through it and finds diary entries, old cell phones with text messages and screenshots. And so Nellie tries to piece together Kathy's life through these things. And it makes a lot of the novel epistolary. Now, since this is contemporary, I did want to pull from some contemporary craft as well. It's hard to find contemporary epistolary novels, but there is this one from the 2010s, Super Sad True Love Story. I read this and I learned a lot about craft from it, and I realized that with epistolary novels, you can really play around with order of events and irony. So I did this really crazy, fun revision technique that we've learned from Mary Helen, where you cut up your novella, hang it on the walls in different pieces of scenes, and then you rearrange it and mess around with order of events. So in my novel, you might see Kathy's opinion on an event before you see Nellie, so then you know stuff that Nellie doesn't know, and so it creates all of this irony and tension and makes the novel much more complex. Another craft element that I wanted to take from Gothic literature was the focus on atmosphere and setting. In Gothic literature, you have that big, beautiful Victorian haunted mansion. It doesn't have to be haunted, but a lot of times it is. Kathy is seen as a ghost in Wuthering Heights, and she is in my novella as well. But the setting can be used to set the mood. Often the mood is very dreary and dark, so think of like stormy weather, dusty libraries. But setting can be a lot more than that as well. The house itself can become a character, and the setting can be very important when it comes to plot. Jane Eyre is a perfect example of this. Think about how the Jane Eyre at Lowood is so different than the Jane Eyre at Thornfield. These women's character change are really marked by what houses they live in. And so I wanted my Kathy to have a big move as well. I had her move from New Jersey to Austin, Texas. And I chose these locations because I am very familiar with them, but also because I wanted to have some character change in Kathy from one place to the other. And I found it so disturbing how it almost didn't matter that she moved across her country. It almost doesn't matter what house she's in or where she's living because she is so isolated. But she did go to a different church in Texas than she did in New Jersey. And so she had access to people her age. She had access to boys her age. So we find Edgar from church, and we find Heathcliff from church camp. And so she did find some independence and some character change in the move. And so overall, I was able to write a 130-page novella with all of these revisions, thanks to my friends Ollie and Lily, who read it and gave me critique letters. Thanks to Brian Sheeran for helping me in my initial research phase and pointing me in the direction that I need to go to research Gothic literature. And thanks to Beth Ekman for helping me come up with the idea for this project and giving me the confidence to do something I'm so passionate about. And of course, to the most important one of all, my mentor, Mary Helen Speck, who has taught me so much about what a novella even is, who has taught me so much about the revision process. In our workshops, we usually only get to do one revision, but she has encouraged me to go through so many, and I've just learned so much from her, and I've been so grateful to work so closely with her. So thank you all so much for being excited about this and for encouraging me to do something that I'm passionate about. And here are my sources, and thank you so much, and I'm ready.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes, give or take. So I'm going to turn this over to Ariel's mentor and advisor, Mary Helen. And if you guys want to send in some questions, I'm happy to read those, and we'll give Ariel and Mary Helen a couple of minutes to respond.
Hi guys. I just want to say quickly that I was a real honor to work with Ariel on this project. When she first came to talk to me about this idea, I was frankly kind of suspicious of how one could take Wuthering Heights and transfer that believably into a contemporary fictional project. And I've just been so impressed with Ariel. She's worked so hard. She's put in a lot of effort. And she's also just had a lot of vision. I feel like I've learned, definitely I probably learned more from her kind of reading through this project than she has from me. So congrats, Ariel. It's a great book, or novella.
Thank you.
It's a great novella.
Lots of compliments coming in the chat room. We'll give everybody another minute or two to see if there's anything they would like you to address.
In the meantime, Ariel, can you kind of tell the people a little bit about how you approached your revision and what you found to be kind of the most challenging or surprising part of that process for you?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part of revising this project was the length of it. Just having to rewrite it over and over. There is no such thing as writing, there's only rewriting. So I had to write so many chapters over and over and over, changing so much, but always for the better. So it was always really encouraging I guess to do several different revisions, seeing how vastly different it can become. But I guess just the extent that I had to go through, like I think 12 chapters over and over, probably just the length made it the hardest. Are there any like more specific questions about revision that you had?
Did you learn anything about your characters that you didn't know going in?
Oh yeah, definitely. I had to flesh out characters sometimes in like the third revision, realizing I don't even know who this person is. I still have to completely create this person. So yeah, I had to like learn a lot about my story and about my characters as I went along.
Thank you all so much. We're out of time. We're going to have about a minute or two before our next presenter begins. Please stick around if you'd like to hear our next presentation. Again, we're maybe C. Feel free to jump into any other rooms if you'd like. The next round of presentations should start at 1:50. Thanks, and a round of applause to you, Ariel. Thank you for both the video and the lovely presentation today. It's so nice to see your face.